Dr. Raymont Anderson back with us. We welcome him back. He has a rather long resume, a lot of degrees, and I'm not going to go into all of them or we'll be here for a while. But I will put his bio, a link to his bio in the chat and the comments in a little bit so you can check that out yourself later on. He describes himself as a lifelong learner with a passion for self-development, personal transformation, transmutation, and he, through his service, through transformative teachings, technologies, and practices of new thought, he helps people and communities recognize, realize, and materialize their full divine potential. He currently serves as Senior Minister of the Center for Spiritual Living, Greater Baltimore. We welcome him back. We know that your words will be a blessing and will expand our understandings of our truest selves.
Yes. So, Unity of Bellevue, I'm back. So today, what are we talking about today? This idea of boldly living a new story. So if you're ready, because this we're gonna touch on a couple of things, but boldly living a new story. If we're actually going to do this, then we have to like sort of excavate a couple of things and talk about like what is a story at all? What is a story? Because we can't really live a bold new story until we authentically and transparently and courageously look at the stories that we have thus far been living. Because it takes courage to change some of what once was. So we really have to sit with it, breathe it in, and then do the processes. But let us start first with the etymology of story. The etymology of story says a story is a connected account or narration of something that is happening. So think about whenever you are talking about, so last week, Monica and I, we went to the coffee shop and we sat down and we had coffee and we talked about all kind of stuff. Mostly we talked about y'all, but we talked about all kind of stuff, right? Well, in that there is narration. We are telling a story to one another about one another and others within our lives. So how we tell stories changes or shapes the experience. So pause and take that in for a second. How we tell a story changes the story. Now, there are a couple of synonyms for story. Story is an adventure. Story is a description. It's a feature. For those of you who might be around my age, you may remember, and we're not going to talk about that, but you may remember back in the day when, you would go to the movie theater and there would be a double feature, right? There were two stories being told. A story is also a recorded account of something. It's a report. Okay, so how do we record things? How do we report things? How do we describe things? How do we put a light on and feature certain things in our lives? All of that matters if we are going to focus on telling a bold new story. For example, in this era of pandemic, many folks will say things like, I can't wait until we get back to the way things were before the pandemic. But what we recognize as God is always forward. God is always evolving and expanding. Spirit doesn't do backwards, right? It doesn't do what was. What was is gone. Like I can't breathe yesterday's breath. I can't rebreathe yesterday's breath. I can try, but I'm going to look foolish trying to breathe yesterday's breath because that breath was right now's breath. I can conceptualize it and say, but it wasn't, it was now. So we can't reclaim. So what are we going to do? I can't wait, or I look forward to what the next phase of life will look like post-pandemic. How do we describe? How do we feature? How do we record? How do we tell this story? There is also this idea of story when we talk about, any skyscraper and we say, Amber lives on the 14th story, like her penthouse is on the 14th story of the building. Oh, so stories are also the layers or the levels of activity. Now, if God is all there is, and it is, then God is that skyscraper. And every experience we have, my 5-year-old self might have been the first floor. My 10-year-old self is the 15th floor. My 55-year-old self is the 170th floor. And at any given moment, I may go up and down on the elevator to visit certain memories, certain experiences, and yet I am still encompassed in the building, which is life, which is spirit, which is the all that is. Okay, follow me thus far. But if I want to expand, then I have to say, okay, so why am I spending so much time focusing on the 13th floor where all of the bad stuff in my life happened? And I'm telling the story from the 13th floor point of view. I'm looking out the window from the 13th floor point of view. I'm recollecting and eating the meals that are available on the 13th floor, but I'm being invited to the observation deck on the roof. I can't be in two places at once. So in order for me to be there in consciousness and love and joy and have this freedom of living an authentic life, then I have to be willing to move from the 13th floor. Okay, so let's pause and bring to mind any story that you like. It could be Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. It could be Harry Potter. It could be like whoever, just bring it to your mind. And recognize that whatever this story is, there is a genre. The genre might be drama, tragedy, horror, suspense, sci-fi, action. There's a genre. Well, each of our lives is a story as well. And the manner in which we describe our lives, because if we're honest, we know that there are some folks that we know that when they start telling their stories, it's like, oh, here comes Shakespeare. Is it a comedy or is it a tragedy? Because we know, right? We know. And we can watch the news and we know that certain ways that the news broadcast, they're broadcasting it as today. The weather today is going to be dark and gloomy. Oh my, oh my. It's raining. It's not a tragedy, dude. Calm down and breathe. Breathe. Recognize the Christ consciousness is in the rainfall. Breathe. If we want to change our story, boldly living a new story, then we have to get grounded and recognize, okay, so what genre has my life, has my story been thus far? And am I willing to change the genre? Because many of us, like any book lover, any bibliophile, there are certain things like, I'm a Trekkie. I only read the series of books in Barnes and Noble that are the Star Trek or the Star Wars or we won't read anybody else. My favorite author, and we won't read anybody else. But if we want to live boldly and authentically and audaciously, then we have to be willing to expand our lexicon of life and live from a new state, a new place. We have to be willing to recraft, to edit, to rewrite, whatever words we want to use, we have to be willing to make the adjustment if we want to live a different kind of life. Breathe. Speaking of authors, there's an author by the name of Octavia E Butler. Some of you may recognize that name. Octavia says, all that you touch, you change. Breathe. Because that touching can come from how you sing, how you glance at someone. Because you know there are times when someone looks at you and you're like, why are they looking at me like that? And there's a whole story that we create about that look. So how we are touched, okay? So all that you touch in word, in thought, in deed, in song, in hugs, in socializing, all of it. All that you touch, you change, and all that you change changes you. Law of reciprocity, law of circulation. What you reap, you must sow. What you sow, you must reap. Like it works both ways, right? So we understand that you change it, it changes you. Is that not why we do things like gardening and changing the color of the bedroom? Because we love the color blue, we love the color green, we love the color. And so we want the experience of walking into a beautiful bedroom or living room or garden, because as we created it, now it gives back to us. So all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. And the only lasting truth is change, because God is change. God is not stagnant. God is not just twiddle my thumbs, twiddle my, oh, let's navel gaze. Like, God is about ever expanding consciousness, right? It's all that is. A circle whose circumference is nowhere, whose center is everywhere, that is the expansiveness of all the stars that we will never be able to count, grains of sand on beaches that we will never be able to count in full. It is that and so much more. And it is ever changing. And what it is, we must be. So let's pause and breathe, because I'm going to give you 5 steps to living a bold new story. So I don't know if you want to get a pencil, pad, paper, something. I'm going to jot some stuff down. There you go, Monica. Monica ready. She's ready with some notes. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is identify what you desire to experience. That's the very first thing. And for me personally, I do my best to no longer talk about manifesting, attracting, creating, or co-creating, because ultimately what it's about is, what do I want to experience in my life? Sometimes those words get us caught up with, well, if I'm manifesting, I have to create it. I have to, out of thin air, and make it twinkle, twinkle. Like, I've got to, no, it's already you. It's where you are. It's what you are. God is all there is, and it's breathing you, right? So what do I want to experience, and how do I engage the process of being my spiritual magnificence so that I now experience it? Because even when it's something like, well, Monica and I are doing coffee. Why? Because we want to experience the camaraderie of being in each other's presence and the taste of the chai latte. We want the experience of that because it's a beautiful, delicious, it's a beautiful, delicious experience. That's what we want, right? So first, identify what you desire to experience, while also being mindful that this process, spirituality, is not about denying sadness, grief, pain, etc. It's about both and. For example, my mother made her transition Father's Day last year, and right now I am still going through the grief process. However, both and. I choose to experience joy, happiness, wonderment, love. So while I am in the midst of whatever this grief thing is, I also have the opportunity to say yes, feel sad, and express joy, love, happiness, both and. So it's not about denying or bypassing, or it's both and. Because if what we are is the divine, we are the Christ consciousness, living, moving this self, then we have the capacity to feel sad and yet know and be our divine, spiritual, magnificent selves as well. Okay? So Raymond Charles Barker said, all creation starts with desire. God desired self-expression. And from that desire, consciousness was born. The desires of your heart are the possibilities that can be manifested in your experience. You are that which God is. There is one mind, that mind is God. There's one life, that life is God, and it is living itself in, through, and as you. So your desire is the desire of God. Let it settle. Breathe it in. Number 2, identify what current things, thoughts, beliefs, memories, traumas, people, situations that are prohibiting you from living life on your terms or telling the same old story. Like, what is encouraging you to tell the same old story? It's often misattributed to Einstein, but someone said the definition of insanity is doing the same old, but expecting different results. So what thoughts, beliefs, people, situations, memories are inspiring us to tell the same stories, but expecting something different? because it doesn't work that way. You can get on a merry-go-round and you can be like, oh, giddy up, I'm riding a horse, giddy up, and it can go 90 miles an hour, giddy up, and it's only going to take you in a circle. It's never going to take you home, right? So if we want to live a new life, then we must step off the merry-go-round of same old, business as usual, and craft the process of what it means to change that experience. Number 3, identify what role you play in the stories of others. See, it's easy to say and this is a story I used to tell. So I grew up as an abused child, alcoholism in the family and drug abuse in the family, verbal abuse, like all kinds of stuff. And it was like, oh God, why me? Why me? Like that was the story, the martyr syndrome. And it's easy to look at, well, they abused me. They did this to me. It's their fault. It's them, and it's they, and it's they, and it's they. But I'm a they in somebody else's story. And it's a different point of reflection when you say, how am I impacting them? How does my presence show up in their life? Am I the wicked witch in Monica's story? Because if I am, I might want to put my broom down. I might want to pour the bucket of water on my own head and let me change and transform. Like I want to be mindful of, how am I showing up? Am I in Amber's story? If I only had a brain. Like, am I the one who's always telling myself and telling Amber, I'm not good enough. I'm never going to be good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. And like, is that who I am in her story? Because that impacts her. Even if let's rewrite Harry Potter and it's only Harry Potter. There's no Dumbledore. There's no Hermione. There's nobody. It's just Harry Potter. How long of a story is this? Harry Potter, period. Oh, that was a good book. Wow. Like that fits on a business card. That's not a story. Because even if a one-man show is telling a story, they are recounting and bringing in the characters. And so they're still talking about others. No story is solely one individual. John Donne said, famous poet said, no man is an island unto himself. We are all interconnected continents, islands, states, and cities. And ultimately what it's recognizing is that we are all interconnected with, in, through, and as God. But it's mindful. What is my story? How is my story impacting? Am I bringing life affirmation or life denying into the stories of those around me? Be mindful. Mark Nepo said, in many ways, our stories are part of one story. Our pain is part of one pain. Our surprise at the beauty and the fragility of life is part of one chorus of awe. It's a chorus. It's not a solo, it's a chorus. And so when Rita says, Reverend Ray, I ache, my heart hurts, I'm sad, then I embrace that because there's one pain, there's one spirit, one life. And so if anyone is hurting, then we are all on some level hurting. Nothing happens in isolation in this thing called God. But if I continue to tell the story about, it's only me, I'm all alone, ain't nobody here to support me, ain't nobody, it's just me. I got to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. Because if I want something done, I got to do it by myself. I can't trust nobody, don't rely on nobody. What story does that tell? Because even in that, it's saying, oh, I don't trust God. I don't trust God as it is showing up as Monica to be of assistance to me. Is that the story I am choosing? Or am I ready to change that story? Step number 4, identify the various practices that will form and strengthen the foundation upon which your building of life, this bold, new, amazing life is built. Practices such as forgiveness, Remembering that forgiveness is not about anyone else. I often remind people, if you get bitten by a snake, the venom is in you. It doesn't matter what you do to the snake. Dice it, chop it, burn it, throw it 100 miles away, put it in a rocket ship and send it to Mercury. The venom is already in you. Forgiveness is getting the venom out of you. It has nothing to do with the snake. Let me release what this toxin, resentment, bitterness, anger, let me release it and surrender it so that I may move through to my next level of how I am telling my story. Forgiveness. Active and conscious prayer. We understand our thoughts are prayers and we are always praying. But how often are we doing so mindfully, consciously, and actively? It's one thing to look at someone who is homeless as we walk by and be like, ooh, what is, ooh, We have the power of life and death in our tongue, is what it says in the Judeo-Christian Bible. The power of life and death. I could choose to curse. Ooh, why don't you just get a job? Why is it so blah, 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 blah. Story, story, story. Or what I could choose to do is recognize and affirm that if I am God and God is all there is, then so too is this man, woman, person who is laying there on the ground without a home, without a bath, without food. And so let me recognize and acknowledge and pray that that which they are recognizes their own spiritual magnificence, that they and that their story is also shifted by my recognition. Because if there is only one pain and only one life, then let me acknowledge right now there is only one blessing as well. And that as I am blessed and I speak that and think that and pray that we all must also be blessed. Because there is no corner, there's not a spot where God is not. Then my blessing, this corner of existence, blesses every corner of existence. Conscious and mindful active prayer. Mindful communication. Let me be mindful of the words that I'm using and how I am using them. Because I may say something to someone and not recognize the impact it may be having on them. So the moment I am aware, what words am I choosing? How am I choosing to express this idea? It changes the story. Be willing to have holy confrontation and blessed boundaries. Sometimes we get into people pleasing, that we let others do whatever they're going to do in our homes, in the consciousness, in our minds, in our hearts, and we get disrespected and discouraged and disillusioned because we are not firm on. We can love everybody, but that does not mean we need to to enable. We don't need to enable. We understand that I can love someone in my family who is an alcoholic. It doesn't mean I accept or approve of their alcoholism. It doesn't mean I accept or approve of that and enable them to be able to continue to do that. Holy confrontation is my saying, no, it's time for an intervention. Blessed boundaries. No, you cannot drink in my home. No, you cannot drive your car while drinking. Boundaries, confrontation are not necessarily bad things. They are part of how we step into this thing called radical self-care. And if we're going to talk about this radical self-care, well, let me say this first. Step number 5 is to live it, be it, do it. Ernest Holmes said, today you are going to take your life into your own hands by realizing that God is ever with you, in you, through you, and as you. It's all there is. And when we recognize, so Amber sang this song, which is actually one of my favorite songs, You Gotta Be. And there's a line in it that says, you gotta be bad. So one of the first things that comes to my mind is when you got to be bad is bad acronym. You got to be beautiful, you got to be authentic, and you got to be divine. Because when you are beautiful, authentic, and active, and divine, and you are demonstrating from this place of consciousness, then what happens? You listen as your day unfolds. You are willing to challenge the paradigms of what the future will hold. You are no longer operating based upon, well, what was, must, what always, that's the way it's always been, Reverend Ray. That's the way it's always got to be. No, it doesn't, because there was a time where Black people couldn't vote, women couldn't vote, gay people couldn't get married. That's what was. There was a time when there was no electricity and that cars were carriages pulled by horses. So what was doesn't necessarily have to always be what is. So are we willing to challenge the future, to challenge what is possible, to challenge and bring love into all of our interactions? Because if we are, then what else did Amber say? Go ahead and release your fears. Surrender them. Let them go. Because if we're holding on to them, we cannot serve two masters. We cannot serve freedom and fear in the same breath. We can be free and feel the I'm afraid, I feel fear. You can feel it, but you can't be afraid and be free at the same time. Breathe for a second. What else did she say? Lovers may cause you tears. There may be moments where we are hurt by those closest to us, but that doesn't mean it is the end all be all of, because even in those tears, those sacred and blessed tears, we recognize and know the truth of our being. So we gotta be willing to live a new life. We gotta be willing to tell a new story. We gotta be willing to be bold and brave, to be audacious, to be magnificent, to be joyful. Because the moment we are willing to be what we gotta be, life changes. And let us not forget the words of Charles Fillmore, who said, I fairly sizzle. I love that word, sizzle. I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth. Didn't say, and I sit back and kick up my feet. He said, and I spring forth with a mighty faith, because what do we know? Faith without works is dead. And I spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me. Faith is action. And how we show up in the world is a demonstration of what we believe, what we hold in consciousness. We can think it's not, but it is. So let us pause and let us take all this in as I prepare to ground us and anchor us in prayer, recognizing in this breath that is a demonstration of spiritual practice in and of itself, because this breath reminds us to be present. Because I cannot breathe tomorrow's breath. I cannot breathe yesterday's breath. I cannot save a breath for a rainy day. I can only breathe this inhalation and this exhalation now, present, in the presence of all that is. This breath reminds me also to recognize and to surrender to the body, which is intelligent enough to know how to breathe itself. I am not saying lungs expand and lungs contract. I am having this divine conversation with you all, and my body says, I got the breath, do what you do. But ultimately, we are recognizing that this breath is God breathing itself in, through, and as each one of us. And so from that place of recognition and surrendering in this presence, I speak what I know, knowing that God, the infinite power, presence, love, the light that is all that is right here in us, through us, and as us. And as we say, wherever I go, God is, and all must be well. So right now, I tell the story of my wellness, knowing that everyone that I see and everyone who sees me feels the power and presence of creation itself. That everyone whose voice I hear and everyone who hears my voice hears the voice of the universe saying, I am you. I am that is ever becoming more of itself as you. That everyone I touch and everyone who touches me feels the very power that the woman who touched Jesus's cloak says, I feel that energy and I know. And so I speak this word knowing that every single person on this call and everyone who watches this call later, and even those who aren't present to this Zoom gathering right now, whether on Facebook or YouTube later, that this truth must be the truth for all of God. It must be the truth for all of God. So right here and right now, I know that the writing of a new story is unfolding. The telling of a bold new story is unfolding. Right now, the very narration of our lives is the narration of Christ consciousness moving forth, experiencing itself with each word, with each thought, with each bold action. Knowing this, I surrender it into the law that always says yes, that divine creative thing that says yes, yes, and yes. And knowing that this is received in that which is God, that means it's already answered prayer. So I surrender it and allow it to be that demonstration. And together we touch and agree and declare it by saying, and so it is.